Today, we're finding the intersection of art and mythology with a whistle, a little piece of the moon, and a story that asks the reader to take a look at tradition versus progress, how we handle fear, and how we look at each other. Today, we're going to look at why we like When Jasy Whistles. Joining me for this conversation is someone who's musical, crafty, creative, insightful, and if I may be so bold, a cultural polyglot who loves storytelling in all its forms more than me. Welcome to the show, Liz.
Hey, Chris.
We're going to talk about When Jasy Whistles, which is a webcomic. You pitched this one to me, and I read it, and I think it's great. I like a lot of stuff about it. Do you mind if I give the pitch about what the webcomic is?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
Cool. So When Jasy Whistles is a webcomic, like I said. It's about the main character, Hela, and Jasy Whistles, who is a demigod, and at least according to the webcomic is a demigod, and their journey through the mythical lands of the Guarani mythological world. Hela is searching for her lifelong friend Rodri, who's disappeared in a mystical situation, and Jasy is trying to bring Hela to a gate for his own reasons. We don't know what those are yet. Sound about right?
Yep, that about sums that up.
All right, cool. We're going to get into spoiler territory, so if you haven't read this yet and you're thinking about reading it, you might want to turn off the podcast, go read the 18 issues that are out as of this recording, and then come back and listen. With that warning out of the way, Liz, what is it about When Jasy Whistles that first hooked you into the story?
The setting. For me, it's about exploring other cultures and having insight into those cultures through webcomics is such a gift for us as readers. So that was essentially what drew me in. But I won't lie, the idea that there is also the supernatural element also draws me.
I'm with you there. Anything that's got some sort of magic attached to it is a great way to hook me in, especially when it starts in the modern world. I mean, this feels a little bit like an isekai anime in some ways because it's somebody being drawn into a different world. Also, like any of those stories where a female protagonist ends up going on a journey in a mythical world, like Labyrinth, Alice in Wonderland, stuff like that, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely has that feel to it for sure.
This is a story that is based in a mythology that is not like something that we are typically used to, especially, you and I both being from the United States of America. What are some of your favorite things about the mythological stuff that's going on there?
I think I like a lot of the exposure and also the pacing of the exposure. I think that's a big thing because, as you said, we're both from the US. So jumping into a story where this is mythology that's based entirely in the indigenous regions of Paraguay, that's a huge jumping off point in and of itself as a storyteller. So we want to be able to take it piece by piece and be able to understand it. And I think the author's done a great job of translating those myths into something accessible.
I would agree. I did a little bit of research on Guarani mythology to get ready for this episode. And it was interesting because Jasy Whistles is, in their mythology, not a very nice person. And you could argue that in the webcomic, he's not generally a very nice person either.
No, he's very self-centered, but in a survivalist sense, just because where they are or what they've revealed in the story so far is that he's on his own. In the relationship that he has with his siblings and his nephews, so to speak, they are more than willing to kill him for survival also. So it's very interesting to see how base and animalistic those characters are, even though to us they look just as human as we do.
At least the ones that we've seen so far.
Yes.
Which is only Jasy.
Yeah. And I know in the mythology that's stressed upon is that he's really the only one that looks fair of face. So that's interesting that even in Guarani mythology, there's that Pied Piper-esque character that needs to look and appeal to us as humans in order to lead us to our demise, essentially.
He is that. Jasy Whistles, if we're going to get into this a little bit, like he's known as a little piece of the moon. He is the guardian of the yerba mate plant, which is a plant that grows down that way. Also, the guardian of hidden treasures, very good at that. And the most interesting part to me is sort of the demigod of the Siesta.
Yes.
Especially for children. And that's where some of the stuff that we're talking about with his the nice and not nice thing, the Pied Piper-esque thing goes. Because in the nice versions of the stories told about Jasy, he lures children who don't take their afternoon siesta into the woods to play with them. And when they're tired out and tuckered out, he snaps his fingers and they wake up back in their bed. In the not nice versions, he pokes their eyes out with sticks and keeps them trapped and feeds them berries and fruits until they're animalistic, or he just feeds them to his brother Ow Ow.
Yes, and they've given Ao Ao a very nice introduction in the story.
Not that I actually don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I tried to look around to find a pronunciation for it, but that seems correct, I think.
Yeah, it's essentially to emulate the sound of a wolf howling.
Which is funny because he doesn't look like a wolf according to the mythology. He looks like a very mean sheep or a peccary, which is like a feral pig boar looking mammal.
Yeah, they make him look like a boar, and then his children they made look more like wolves.
That art is really interesting too, because when you see Ao Ao, it's that purple outline of energy, which they're doing the color thing with energy, which is interesting to me. I like that a lot. It helps really identify stuff in a visual form.
Oh, for sure.
And the only other person in the mythology that they've mentioned so far is Tao, which is Ao Ao and Jasy's father, who is, you don't get this in the comic, but in the mythology, he is the evil spirit or the personification of evil, which is interesting to me. Like, I can't wait to see where that goes. And Jasy is very scared of his dad.
Oh, he is so terrified of his dad. That said, and it's revealed in some of his quips, is that as terrified as he is, he kind of seems to be putting on like a brave face. He's just like, well, it's not the first time I've disobeyed him. But there's also the other part of him that's just like, I have, and what were the consequences? But they haven't been revealed yet. And that's an interesting illusion that they're making as far as their relationship goes.
Yes, very much so. Also, they've built Tao up in the comic as the father of curses because all of his children are cursed, which they haven't explained that in the comic yet. There is some pretty interesting hints as to why that has popped up in the mythology, but I don't necessarily know that I want to talk about that today because we're going to come back and do another episode on this once we've gotten to like issue 40.
Yeah, and we'll definitely have read some more spoiler material by that point for sure.
Totally. So the other character that we should talk about before we really get into this is Hela, who's the other main character. And she's a 20-year-old leader of a tribe in Chico. I'm actually not sure how to pronounce that, but I'm going to go with Chico. And somebody please correct me if you know the proper pronunciation, Paraguay. And that's in South America. And at the beginning of the story, her tribe is moving on to a more modern world, but she wants to keep the tribe going as she promised to her abuela. The abuela gave Hela the tribe when Hela's father decided not to take it and move to the city. The first issue of this is that. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about Rodri in a bit, because while he's not in the story very much at the beginning, except for at the beginning, he actually plays a pretty important role in my opinion as far as like, aside from being a plot mover, but an important story beat for Hela.
Oh, absolutely.
That all being said, we're 18 issues in. What are some of your favorite moments in the story so far and why?
My favorite moments in the story so far, aside from the action sequences that have been illustrated for our pleasure, would be the changing of the dynamic between Hela and Jasy. And I don't actually even know if I'm pronouncing that right. It might be Yasiater, because I think it's a Y, but...
Siater? Just see it? Yasiater?
Yasiater, I think.
So Yasiater, is that probably the more correct way to pronounce it?
I think so, just because it would possibly be the Y sound. But we're both from the US, and I have no idea if that's right or not.
So this episode's title should actually be Jasy When Jasy Whistles. That actually makes way more sense. That sounds way more correct. Great.
But I don't know. That is not something that I am super familiar with as far as pronunciation goes.
So it took a bit of digging, but after a little while I found an animated short film called Siesta. I'm going to guess that this is right. It's Yasuyatere. That is how you pronounce it. Yasuyatere. Even if we pronounce it wrong for the rest of the episode, the proper pronunciation is Yasuyatere. Thank you, Gabriel Aralaga. It was their thesis film done at Sheridan College. I'll put a link in the show notes.
Back to the idea that for me, my favorite thing right now is just watching their dynamic change. Just because they are both in the position they're in for their own self-centered reasons. Hela got into the situation that she's in, both to save Rodri, but also I think to prove to herself that by saving him, she is making things right with the way the tribe is right now. Which definitely is a motivator for sure because of the state of the tribe when she gets brought into the supernatural world of Jasy. But on the opposite side of that is Jasy, who's possibly abducted Rodri in order to get Hela to make the agreement with him about opening the gate. So I think it's very twofold in that way.
Well, and then when you add on to that there's been a number of instances where Yassi's like, I don't trust humans. And there's no reason for that given yet, but it seems to me that a human betrayed him in the past because of his internal monologue.
And slightly external monologue because when they were making the pact that Jasy would ensure Rodri's safe return for Hela's assistance in opening this gate that has yet to be revealed also, he says externally that when she noticed that he's bleeding, she pulls the dagger up to try to kill him. And he says, and this is why I don't trust humans.
You were absolutely right. That totally happens, I think, in issue 2. They don't trust each other. That's a big theme of the story, is trust. How do they deal with learning how to trust each other? Why don't they trust each other? It spawns a whole bunch of interesting plot points in the story.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and especially with where it's left off, and this isn't like huge as far as spoilers go, is that there's major action sequences, so people get hurt, Hela being one of them, and he gives her, or he produces this fruit, this magical fruit that we didn't realize. We knew it was magical because he just kind of makes it out of thin air, but he's giving her this fruit in order for her to regain her strength, because they still have a ways to go on this journey, and he's made a promise, which is an interesting change to see, because he still claims not to trust people, but there's a part of him that I think recognizes, I still need her to achieve my goal. I need to give a little trust in this regard.
Also, she has proven to him a few times that she is not like the humans that he has dealt with before, where she will actually like sacrifice her life for other people. She will throw herself into danger for what she believes are the right reasons. And he seems to respect that.
Yes, you're right. I think he respects that in his mind, but out loud, he's definitely given her grief for doing that exact thing, because he's just like, no, you need to survive so we can open this gate and I can achieve my end goal that you don't know yet, but you need to stop this right now.
Mm-hmm. So you talked about the action sequences, and that is something I actually want to talk about, because the way that movement is depicted in the art in this webcomic is really quite exceptional. The use of line and the use of paneling in a webcomic it's different than a comic book, right? It's not, you're not bound by the page. So, I mean, and this is a scroller. So like you can actually, and in fact, the way that I was reading it is I was actually holding my middle mouse button down and letting it scroll slowly and reading it like a film almost, not really. But you know what I mean?
It kind of moves like a film strip, though, the way that the panels are put together. I agree.
It was a really interesting way for me to read the webcomic, because aside from this, like the webcomics that I've read most prevalently are like Order of the Stick and Sluggy Freelance, and those are drawn in a much more often comic book style with panels and whatnot. Not that this doesn't have panels, because it does. It's just that there's a less restrictive paneling, is the best way for me to put it.
Right, because there are points in the illustration where they can over panel, so they can take a square of panel, almost like a thumbnail almost, and lay it over an actual full panel just to build on essentially what it would be like 2 camera views.
Yes.
So you're getting camera A and then you're getting camera B, and it's laid on at the same time.
Also, the super long stretch panels that sometimes pop up, there's that too, that you wouldn't normally get in a comic book or print media, which I think is cool.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah. And that's really a great use of the space and a great use of modern technology, in that most people that'll read this, that I know, will read it on their phone, because these are very reasonably sized episodes of information and something that you can read on like a coffee break or a lunch break or something like that. So to be able to have full chapters at your fingertips and be able to visually see all of those panels laid out in a very nice and neat manner is also a perk.
Yeah, absolutely. The story's not super far in yet. There's like the intro and then the first little arc, and they're like in their second little arc right now, which it took me about 2 hours to catch up, maybe not even that. So, I mean, this is a very, very beautiful, easily catch-upable webcomic at the moment.
I agree.
There's the one thing I wanted to point out. This is where Rodri comes in. So Rodri is Hela's friend from very, very young. They were younger than 10, actually, when they became friends. Rodri has an interesting thing about him. There's something going on with him that we don't know yet, where him and then his mother before him, they would cry blood on full moons. I don't really know the mythological significance of that in the background of the story. Maybe you do.
It hasn't been revealed yet. And you did make an interesting point to backtrack a little bit earlier that Tao is the god of curses. My brain thinks, ooh, I wonder if there's that connection there because she absolutely believes it's a curse. The dad mentions during one of the flashback sequences that goes away.
Yeah.
Rodri eventually grows out of it, and it just stops happening to him.
Which is the same day that his mom left.
Yes, it was the same day that his mom left. There's also part of me that's just like, so how much of it is the mom? Is it not the mom at all? Did it stop happening to the mom at some point too because it stopped happening to Rodri? Or is there a clinical reason for it? Because I'm sure if you go on and Google, there's absolutely a scientific explanation, but is that actually what it is? Or is it due to Tao? How much more is there to Rodri's character in that way for the story?
I wonder that too. The thing that threw me off, though, about it was that when that happened to Rodri, Hela's response was, I'm friends with all sorts of people, because Rodri thought he was a monster. Mm-hmm. And Hela was like, I'll be your friend even if you are a monster. It doesn't matter to me. You don't have to be necessarily human for me to be your friend. My best friend's a bird. I'm a little weird, and that's okay. And Rodri was very happy about that. But then when we fast forward to the present day, the first time she meets Jasy, he's a monster and a creature, and I need to kill him.
Right.
And that doesn't go away. So I'm like, what happened in the time period between her being that age and feeling that way to her being 20? Did she change? There's also the indication that Hela has met Jasy previous to this because Yassi's like, you forgot. He said it a couple of times.
Yeah. And there's this mark that shows that's on her hand that wasn't there. And then all of a sudden it shows up when she's in the cave with Rodri. And she mentions it. It's a panel that she just kind of looks down. She's just like, where did this come from?
Also, the necklace that Rodri had been wearing, it looks like a little bit of a moonstone.
Mm-hmm.
Jasy says to her at some point when she has the necklace, says to her, like, it's yours. It's not mine. I didn't put the magic in it to make it glow. It just happens to be yours and it glows, and don't argue with me about it. Without going into it anymore, because also he mentions that there's no way that I'm going to be able to help you remember. You're going to have to remember it on your own. There's something magical, mystical going on there in some way, shape, or form. I just don't know what it is.
Right. And that might even be a huge turning point for her, because I think it's starting to kind of get pieced together when she's unconscious. There's like little glimpses and scenes that they have actually met before that she, I think, is trying to both comprehend and at the same time ignore, because she's at a point where she's like, what good does this actually do me?
Yeah. I mean, she's pretty focused right now. Also, she's gotten the ever-living love beat out of her at this point in the story by Ao Ao's children, the wolf monsters. They bit her on the wrist. She clocked her head once. She got her ribs busted up, bruised or possibly broken. She got slashed in the ribs at one point in time by one of Ao Ao's kids. Like, it's not going super well for her.
Yeah, it's definitely got its gore for sure. Well, and they also ripped Yassi's arm off.
They, in fact, ripped Yassi's arm off.
Yeah, which she sees. And I think that's also a subconscious turning point for her, because, like, he sacrificed his whole arm. Granted, it's growing back, but still, I think there's still some significance for her that he risked his arm to do that.
Risked his life in a lot of ways to do
Yep.
that. And more than once risked his life for her.
And I think that kind of goes back to this idea of, are they really doing this for each other? Which they are, but there's almost something more profound there that I don't think either of them realize, because they're just at this point still using each other to achieve their own ends.
Although some of that trust gets resolved near the end of that first arc when they're on the top of that pillar of rock and all of Ao Ao's kids are around, and she's like, I need you to trust me. And he's like, all right, I'll trust you. Otherwise, we're going to die anyway.
Right.
So let's jump off into this pit. And at the last second, you can use your because Jasy can make these discs of like solidified magical water that you can stand on, and sometimes he can float you when he's got enough power, but he's kind of low on juice. But they only needed it for a couple of seconds so they could hit on it. and then jump off because she was pretty sure and she was correct. And it makes a lot of sense in the story that all the dogs would jump in after her. And they did. And by dogs, I mean terrible wolf demons. And they get away. And then, of course, after that, she's in a lot of pain and hurting and needs to be carried by Jasy. And Yasy's like, well, this time you have to trust me. So they learned to trust each other a bit there, which is good. Good for the story development.
Oh, absolutely.
And it kind of helps resolve some of that trust stuff. Not that it's completely resolved, but it's at least they've moved past like the initial I don't trust you at all moments.
And I think we're definitely going to see more growth there for sure. But I think she's going to, and they are at the point in the story where they are, or they have actually met other people. And he makes food for her to help regain her strength, and she takes it and offers it to these strangers, and they immediately smack the fruit out of her hands and go, what are you doing? His fruit makes you lose your mind. And that's where the chapter ends, and you're just like, okay, how much backtracking does that statement do to where they were as far as trust goes?
The first thing that those people do is attempt to stab him. That's not good in and of itself. Two, we figured out a little bit more about Jasy and why he might not trust people, because the one lady who's there, who's a priestess of some sort, says some things, religious-esque things to Jasy, and Yasy's like, those are the ones you have to watch out for the most, because those are the ones that will betray you the quickest. I'm like, well then, that's an interesting little story beat. I feel kind of bad for Jasy, because it's, to me, obvious that he was betrayed pretty brutally at some point in the past. And I can't wait to see what that is, to see if my feeling bad for him is deserved.
Right, because I think there's also the part of him where it's just how much of his decision-making is based entirely on survival, because he is looking over his shoulder every other second.
It's because everybody's all of his brothers, I think, are trying to kill him.
Right. To go into a little nature versus nurture, I think the actions of his so-called family, which are they are his family, but in like a very demonic and crazy sense. But yeah, I think that goes into the whole idea that they've nurtured these mannerisms and these behaviors of distrust because they have tried to kill him every other second. Uh-huh. And I wonder how much of his behavior was the precursor to the betrayal that changed his viewpoint on humans.
I'm with you 100%. All that stuff is the thing to me that is fascinating about the story going forward. Actually, it's a thing that I want to talk about is those mystery beats that the story has put forth. They're really good. The why Jasy feels betrayed by humans. What's the relationship between Jasy and his father Tao? What happened to Rodri? All those things are interesting to me, but I really would like some of these things to start getting answered in some way, shape, and or form, because I feel like the story's starting to get to a point where it's like, cool, we had the intro, we had the first little arc. We're in the second arc now, and if we don't start answering some of these questions before we raise some new ones, then that's when you start getting to the point when those reveals happen. They either don't feel as good, or we've built them up so far in our heads with what's going on that they feel like letdowns. So I hope that some of these start getting answered soon.
Right, and to be fair, more of those episodes are actually out. It's just you have to have the fast pass.
I do not have it for the 5 episodes.
But for anybody listening that does have FastPass on Webtoon and it wants to read that and is willing to support the creator by investing in FastPass, do it. I'm sure there's like a bunch of stuff in the other 5 chapters that have been posted that we're not caught up on, but are probably like huge plot points.
Are you where I am, or are you farther ahead?
Well, I'm all caught up in where they've released the chapters in the story. That was 18.
19, 20, 21, 22, and 23 are out there to be had.
For anybody listening that wants to invest in the creator, buy FastPass. It's huge for them, and you'll get all caught up.
So I wanted to talk about the creator, Sibelius, but I can't find anything about Sibelius. I think this is their first work that is being like out there for people to see. I found their Instagram page, and it's pretty much just When Jasy Whistles artwork, which is fine. And there's like one other illustration on there. Man, this person can draw. Like, they got talent and skill. I really like the art that's going on here. It's clean. It's easy to absorb what's going on there. The use of blur and distortion is always purposeful and plays well. We talked a bunch about some of the other art stuff, that the storytelling that they're using with the art earlier, but that's what I enjoy about the art. What about you?
I don't disagree on any of that, honestly. I think I find a lot of the same joy in the color. I love the use of color in the story. I love, for me, the way that the artist knows how to build on her panels, and also the spacing that she uses. She can build it really well, but she also knows when to leave space between art. And I think that's also a really great indicator for a great artist, because they know how to pull you into a story with less, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. The use of space is very, very important in most creative mediums, and art is no exception to that. 100% agree. Is there anything else you want to talk about concerning the story or the themes of the artwork?
Let me think for a second.
I'll throw a theme at you that I think is pretty prevalent in the story, which is abandonment.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And it hits you right from the start too.
Mm-hmm.
That and the idea of change. I think change is huge, because you could tell in the story that they start the story in 1980 and then 10 years go by. So that's only 1990. But the amount of change that can take place in 10 years is absolutely astounding. Not just for timeline purposes, but for the character, because we see everybody else in Hella's tribe is they moved to the city, because maintaining an indigenous lifestyle is extremely difficult when the rest of the world is moving into the 21st century, as it were. And I remember this was both really interesting and also made me feel really old, is that, he brings her back a birthday gift and it's a Walkman. Because, that's joys of living in the city. And she makes Rodri makes the point there. It's like, for as nice as living in the city is, having the Walkman is nice because it can also drown it out. And I think that alludes to the idea that as much change as we need to experience in our lives, it's also nice to kind of tone all of that out and ignore it for just a short while.
I find that to be a very insightful point. I didn't even think about that, the whole idea of change. No, that's really good. The Walkman is a really good symbol of a lot of that stuff too, about like change can be good, but it can also be problematic. Sometimes it's good to take a step back. I like that a lot.
And there's other points, especially right in the beginning. And I think this is a lot of where the story wants to take it to, just guessing, but is that it's the idea of her understanding change and how she needs to grow with it and not let change keep her stuck, not behind everyone else, but it's really just keeping her stuck. And being stationary isn't good for her. And Rodri sees it, and the rest of her family saw it too. But for Hella, she wants to be stationary, because if she is, then people would come back. And that leads into the abandonment thing, because she definitely feels abandoned, but her family's not really that far away. And I think they want more for her to understand that what we had in this life was never bad, but I don't know how much we can continue to survive and grow like that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I thought that part of why she doesn't want to move on, well, one, she loves the life that she has. I mean, she really does. Also, like the duty that she feels to her grandmother, her abuela, to stay there and take care of the tribe, because she promised her grandmother that she would.
Right. And that sense of duty is very important for her. And I think she feels both abandoned physically and emotionally, because nobody else stayed, or very few. Rodri's father, Tio Marcos, he stayed, but no one else did.
Uncle Marcos?
Uncle Marcos, yeah.
They don't dive too hard into why. Oh no, they do dive into why he stayed too, and he stayed because he was waiting for his wife to come back, who left 9 years earlier.
Right, and she didn't leave because she didn't love them. She left because she wanted to figure out what was going on with why they cry blood every full moon. But 9 years and she hasn't come back. How much of that is supernaturally based? Because, and we touched on it a little bit earlier, is that she felt that it was part of a curse. Okay, so is that going to be something that gets revealed later on? I hope so, just because I have a hunch that has something to do with Jasy's connection to Rodri and Hella, especially with the fact that Rodri had the necklace. But yeah, definitely want to see where that part goes for sure.
We will. I'm looking forward to that too. It is one of the questions that I'm curious about. At some point, I feel like Rodri needs to be part of this story where they're actually the three of them are all traveling together. That would be great to see the interplay between the three of them, especially if Rodri is not human like I think he's not. I have one more question because we're getting a little on in time, but I need to ask this. Where do you think this story's going?
Part of my brain says that I could see the author making this like a super slow burn. Just with the way that she's incorporated physical elements of Jasy and Hella's like connection so far. The other part of me kind of hopes that they don't, just because I love how they're both growing as individuals, but I think either way I'd feel rather fulfilled with either result in that regard. That said, I think on a deeper level, I want to see more. I definitely want to see more trust. I definitely want to see more of the other gods make appearances for sure.
Yes.
Because
that's what I want.
We got hit with ow-ows right from the start, and that was such a great way to kick off the series. I think was just to throw you right in it. Because it kept that pacing really nice and maintained. So right now it's kind of slowing down a little bit. But even so, we got thrown new characters like not too long after Ow-Ow's got addressed in the story. So I'd like to see where any new relationships they develop go and lead them, especially since the idea of trust is so prevalent right now in the story. That would be huge. Other than that, I'd like, I think, to see the story also take a stab at, I think, a little more of the psychology behind why Hella feels so strongly about the way she does on her feelings of abandonment and the idea of change. I think we'll get that for sure, and I'm sure it won't be super heavy-handed, but I'd like to see that addressed a little more. That could be chapter 20 that I just haven't read yet.
It could be.
So, yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to these chapters. I think one of them drops actually in half an hour.
Ooh, that's exciting.
Yeah, I think it's either 9 o'clock on Wednesdays or Thursdays.
From what I read, new chapters drop on Thursdays.
Cool. That's just kind of what I'd like to see. I'd also like to see some more of Jasy's powers, just because I think we've only gotten like the tip of the iceberg as far as what he can do, just because he was pretty low energy and he'd been wounded, and that depletes a lot of his strength. And I think there's more supernatural goodies there.
Yeah, also Hella is drawing off of his energy to use some of the powers that they're connected, since they're connected to each other.
That's definitely going to be something I'm excited to see, is like when they really start teaming up, because I think there's going to be some really cool action sequences when that happens.
I already mentioned most of the ones that I had, and we're just about out of time because I try to keep these to no more than 45 minutes. So I guess the last thing I will say is if people wanted to talk to you about When Jasy Whistles, where would they find you on the internet?
I am on Facebook and YouTube. I'm Lil Sneeze 91 on YouTube, but other than that, pretty much it.
All right, if people would like to chat with me about this, you can catch me at Chris Sneezy on Twitter. That's where you can find me, or the Why We Like This Discord, which you can find a link in the show notes to that. And on the website, whywelikethis.org. Well, thank you so much, Liz, for coming on and talking about When Jasy Whistles with me. We'll do this again in 5 months when there's 20 more issues to
All
read.
right, that sounds awesome. I can't wait.
And all you folks out there, when you're done listening to this episode, if you feel so inclined, let us know why you like When Jasy Whistles. Thank you for listening to Why We Like This. Look for new episodes on Monday mornings, and the music is Highway Nights from Stream Beats by Harris Heller.